She stood on my porch at 7 a.m., banging the door like the house was on fire. The moment I opened it, she shoved a piece of paper in my face and yelled, "You have 24 hours to leave this property or the HOA will have you removed." I was still in my pajamas, staring at her like she'd lost her mind. "Excuse me? This is my home," I said slowly. She folded her arms, chin high, as if I was the intruder. "Not anymore," she snapped. "We voted you out. You violated our parking rule. Your truck is an eyesore. Pack up or the police will come." For a second, I almost laughed. She actually brought two neighbors with her, both standing behind her like backup soldiers. I could see one of them recording me with a phone. "You can't just vote someone out of their own house," I said, trying to stay calm. Karen smirked. "You bought the wrong property. This is HOA territory. We can remove whoever we decide doesn't fit." I glanced at her clipboard and noticed the paper wasn't even official, just a badly printed notice with no signatures. My stomach tightened, not from fear, but from the thought that she had no clue who she was talking to. "I'll tell you what," I said, stepping onto the porch. "You and your little committee can leave now before this gets embarrassing." Her face flushed red. "Are you threatening us? I'm calling the sheriff right now!" She screamed and dialed, pacing on my lawn like she already won. I didn't stop her. I just leaned against the porch rail and watched, because what she didn't know was that the call would be routed straight to my office. I'm the property manager for this entire block. I even own the very house she lives in. The neighbors looked confused when I smiled at them. Karen kept shouting into the phone, trying to sound like a victim. I could almost hear the dispatcher's voice recognizing her name. "You've got 10 minutes to get out of my sight," I said quietly, and for the first time her confidence faltered. She stopped pacing and stared at me like I'd just revealed a secret she didn't want to believe.
She didn't leave. Instead, she jabbed a finger toward my face. "You're bluffing. I've dealt with people like you before. You think because you own a big truck and wear boots, you can intimidate us? The sheriff will handle you." I crossed my arms and stayed silent. That made her even angrier. Her two neighbors started whispering to each other, clearly unsure about backing her up anymore. A few minutes later, a black and white cruiser rolled up. Karen's smirk came back instantly. "See? I told you. You're done," she whispered to me, as if she'd already won the war. But when the officer stepped out, his expression shifted the second he saw me. "Morning, sir," he greeted, nodding respectfully. Karen blinked, thrown off by the tone. "Arrest him. He's refusing to vacate. He's trespassing on HOA property." The officer raised an eyebrow at her. "Ma'am, this is his house," he said plainly. She froze for half a second, then quickly snapped, "No, it's under HOA authority. I have a removal notice right here." She shoved the paper into his hands like it was a smoking gun. He scanned the document, then looked at her with something between amusement and disbelief. "This isn't legal. There's no court order, no signatures, just a note saying you're evicted." Her face turned bright red. "We don't need a court order. We voted. That's how HOA works." That's when I finally decided to speak. Actually, HOA rules don't override state property laws, and since you didn't bother to read your own lease, you might want to know I'm your landlord. You've been paying rent to my company for 3 years. Her jaw literally dropped. The two neighbors gasped quietly. The officer tilted his head toward me. "Is that true?" I nodded and pulled my phone from my pocket, showing the property management app with her lease agreement and my name on it. "Every check she's mailed for rent ends up right here." Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then she stammered, "You're lying. This can't be. This house was bought years ago by a nice couple. They sold it to me last year. Guess they didn't feel like dealing with you anymore." The officer coughed into his fist, clearly trying to not laugh. Karen's neighbor stepped back, suddenly very interested in their shoes. Karen turned to me, her voice shaking. "You tricked me. You set me up." I shook my head. "No, Karen, you set yourself up. You came here to throw me out of my own home while living in mine." Her phone started ringing, probably someone from the HOA board asking how the eviction went. She ignored it, eyes locked on me with a mix of anger and panic. The officer handed the fake notice back to her. "Ma'am, I'd recommend you leave before this crosses into harassment or trespassing charges." Karen's grip on the paper tightened. She didn't leave. Instead, she whispered something that sent a chill down my spine. "This isn't over. You'll regret messing with me."
That threat wasn't just words. By the next morning, I woke up to find my truck gone. At first, I thought maybe I'd parked it down the street the night before, but then I saw the oil stain where it had been. A bright orange sticker was slapped on my garage door. HOA violation. Vehicle impounded. I could almost hear Karen laughing in her kitchen across the street. I called the towing company listed on the sticker. A man with a bored voice answered and said, "Yeah, we got your truck. HOA reported it as abandoned. You'll need to pay $800 to get it back." "Abandoned?" I repeated, gripping the phone tighter. "It was in my own driveway." "That's what they reported. We just follow the order." I hung up, breathing slowly, forcing myself not to explode. I had security cameras all over the property for a reason. I pulled up the footage, and there it was. Karen standing beside the tow truck driver at 2 a.m., pointing at my truck like she was leading a military operation. I emailed the footage to the local sheriff's office immediately, then grabbed my jacket and went to the towing yard. When I got there, the clerk at the desk watched the footage I'd brought on my phone and whistled under his breath. She told us it was a junk vehicle, said it hadn't moved in months. "Guess she forgot the part where I drove it yesterday," I said flatly. I paid the fee just to get my truck back quickly, but I made sure to get a detailed receipt. By the time I pulled into my driveway, Karen was standing on her porch with her arms crossed, smirking. "Guess you learned your lesson," she called out. I stepped out of the truck and looked straight at her. "You just broke about 4 laws last night," I said evenly. She shrugged. "Good luck proving that." "Already did," I replied, tapping my phone in my pocket. For the first time, her smirk wavered, but she didn't back down. She doubled down. "You think a video will save you? HOA voted to have your truck gone. We don't need your permission." I took a slow step closer, stopping at the edge of my lawn. "You're not just an HOA board member. You're my tenant, and you just authorized the illegal towing of your landlord's property." Karen's mouth opened, then shut again. I could see her trying to come up with a comeback, but nothing came out. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from the sheriff's office. "We've seen the footage. On our way." Karen noticed the change in my expression and asked sharply, "Who's that?" I didn't answer. I just smiled at her, the same way she had smiled at me the day before. She didn't like that smile one bit.
Within 15 minutes, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled up in front of my house. Karen hurried down her porch steps to meet them before they even reached the door, waving her arms as if she was the one calling for help. "Officers, finally, you need to arrest him. He's harassing me and threatening the entire neighborhood," she blurted out. The deputies exchanged a quick glance, but kept walking toward me. I stood at the bottom of my porch steps with my phone in hand, calm as ever. "Sir," one of them greeted me, "you reported a vehicle being towed from your driveway without authorization?" I nodded and held out my phone. "It's all here. Camera footage from last night, time-stamped. She called the tow truck herself at 2 in the morning. Karen jumped in, her voice rising. "He's twisting the story. That truck was violating HOA rules. We voted on it. It's an eyesore. Look at that rust bucket." The deputy ignored her and watched the clip on my phone. The second officer leaned in, and I saw both their brows lift when they saw Karen pointing at my truck on the screen. "Ma'am," the deputy said carefully,
You don't have the legal authority to remove someone's vehicle from their private driveway. That's trespassing and potentially theft. Karen let out a sharp laugh. You don't understand. This entire neighborhood is under HOA control. We can enforce— No, the deputy cut her off. HOA rules don't override state law. You cannot tow someone's car off their own property, especially not the person who owns your house. That last line hit her like a slap. He's lying. He's not my landlord. I opened the folder on my phone again and showed the deputies her signed lease. One of them whistled softly. Well, that clears that up. Karen's mouth fell open. You had this planned? You tricked me into— Nobody tricked you, I interrupted, my tone still even. You just didn't bother to know who your landlord was before trying to evict your neighbor. The deputies exchanged another look. One of them asked me, Would you like to press charges for unlawful towing? Before I could answer, Karen lunged forward a little. You can't do this. I was protecting the community, she shouted, her voice cracking now. I stayed quiet for a moment, letting her words hang in the air. Not today, I finally said, but I do want a full incident report filed, and I'll be sending her the bill for the towing fee. Karen stared at me as if she couldn't believe I wasn't retaliating harder. She opened her mouth, then closed it again when one of the deputies warned her to step back. Ma'am, we're also going to document this as harassment. If you do anything further, we'll be back, next time with cuffs, the deputy said firmly. Her defiance crumbled right there on the street. She turned around without a word and stormed back to her porch. I watched her slam her door shut so hard the windows rattled. As the deputies left, one of them glanced back at me and said, quietly, You've got yourself a real piece of work living across the street. I didn't reply. I just looked at her house and thought, she's not done yet. She's too stubborn to let this go so easily.
That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured her pacing in her living room, plotting her next move. By sunrise, my phone buzzed with a flood of notifications, emails from tenants across the neighborhood. Karen had blasted out a newsletter accusing me of being a fraud landlord who was trying to take over the HOA and bully families out of their homes. I almost laughed reading it, but then I saw the last line. Emergency HOA meeting at noon to vote for his removal from the neighborhood. She was rallying the entire block against me. I showed up at the clubhouse right on time. The room was packed, neighbors whispering, some glaring at me, others avoiding eye contact. Karen stood at the front like a queen addressing her court, dressed up in a bright red blazer that screamed, "Look at me." The moment she saw me, her smile stiffened. Well, look who decided to show up, she said loudly, making sure everyone heard. You're here to defend yourself, I assume. I kept my tone even. I'm here to make sure no one else gets misled by your lies. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen slammed a stack of papers on the podium. She claims to be the landlord of my home, but I've done my research. This man is nothing more than a paper owner. He bought properties through loopholes and thinks he can control us. We don't have to tolerate his bullying. I stepped forward, holding up my phone again. Anyone here who rents a home on this street? Check the name on your lease. Go ahead. A few neighbors pulled out their phones, scrolling through their email contract. I watched their faces shift from curiosity to confusion to shock. Karen noticed the change and tried to speak over them. Don't listen to him. He's twisting everything. Enough, I said, my voice low but firm. I've told everyone here. You called the cops to throw me off my own land. You towed my truck in the middle of the night, and you've been paying me rent for 3 years while claiming I don't belong here. The room fell completely silent. Then a woman in the back raised her hand hesitantly. Karen, is it true about the lease? Karen's face went pale. It's complicated. He's using fine print. No.
I own your house outright. There's no fine print. You live on my property. I can prove it in 5 seconds. I projected the official county property records onto the clubhouse screen using my phone. The seal and signatures were undeniable. The murmurs turned into angry voices, neighbors demanding explanations, some even calling Karen a liar outright. Karen's composure cracked. "You don't understand," she shouted. "He's dangerous. He's trying to ruin me." A man from the HOA board stood up. "No, Karen, looks like you've been the one ruining yourself." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She looked around, realizing the room that had once backed her up was now slipping away. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. I just looked at her and said, "You should pack your things before you embarrass yourself any further." Karen's hands clenched into fists. "You think you've won," she hissed under her breath, "but I'm not leaving, not without a fight." And just like that, I knew the war wasn't over. She wasn't going to walk away quietly.
2 days later, I came home from work to find a bright red notice taped across my front door in thick black letters. Condemned. Unsafe structure. Vacate immediately. For a second, I just stood there staring at it. My house was brand new, passed every inspection last month. The notice wasn't from the county. It was printed on the same cheap paper Karen had used for her fake eviction letter. I peeled it off and stepped inside. The lights wouldn't turn on. I checked the breakers. Everything was fine. That's when I saw the electric meter outside was locked with a tag that read, "Service suspended, HOA order." Karen had cut my power. I stormed across the street to her house, knocking hard enough that the door shook. She opened it slowly, acting like she'd been expecting me. "Oh, lost power? That's what happens when you live in a condemned building," she said sweetly, leaning on the door frame. "You crossed a line this time," I said, my voice low. "Cutting utilities is a crime." She tilted her head with a fake innocent smile. "Take it up with the board. We had to protect the neighborhood." Before I could respond, one of her neighbors, an older man, walked up with his phone in hand. "I think you should see this," he whispered to me. He showed me a video he'd recorded that morning. Karen standing by the utility box with bolt cutters, laughing as she clipped the seal and shut off the main power. I thanked him and walked away without another word. Karen called after me, "You can't prove anything. I'm untouchable." That night, I stayed at a friend's place while making a few phone calls to the power company, the sheriff's office, and finally, to my lawyer. The next morning, I returned with the sheriff's deputy and the power company's technician. The deputy stood in front of Karen's door as she opened it, wearing her robe like nothing had happened. "Ma'am, we have evidence you tampered with the electric meter on your landlord's property. That's a felony." Karen's fake smile vanished. "That's ridiculous. You can't prove—" I played the video on my phone for her and the deputy at the same time. Her jaw tightened as the clip clearly showed her cutting the power. The deputy handed her a citation notice. "Consider this your last warning. Another stunt like this, and we'll be hauling you in." Karen snatched the paper from his hand and slammed the door shut without another word. The power company restored my electricity, but I noticed Karen peeking through her blinds the whole time, her face pale but her eyes burning with hatred. As the deputy drove off, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from my lawyer. "We have enough to start eviction proceedings against her." I stared at her window, wondering if she already sensed what was coming. Something told me she wasn't going down quietly.
A week later, the eviction papers were ready. I didn't waste time. I handed them to the sheriff's office for an official serve. That afternoon, I watched from my porch as the deputy walked up Karen's steps, knocked on her door, and calmly handed her the envelope. She opened it right there, her eyes scanning the first page. I saw her face drain of color as she realized what it was. She looked up at me across the street. Her lips trembled, but instead of yelling, she slowly crumpled the paper in her hand and shut the door without a word. For 2 days,
Karen stayed quiet. The neighborhood felt lighter, like the air itself had relaxed. I started thinking maybe she'd finally accepted defeat. But on the third night, just after midnight, I woke up to the sound of tires screeching outside. I pulled the curtain back and saw Karen's SUV parked crookedly on my lawn, headlights blazing toward my porch. I stepped outside, phone in hand, already recording. She jumped out of the car, barefoot, still in her pajamas, clutching a stack of papers. "You can't do this to me," she screamed. "This house is my life. I built this community." I stayed on the steps, keeping my voice steady. "Go home, Karen. You're trespassing again. This isn't the way to solve anything." She shook the papers at me. "I found a loophole. You can't evict me. I talked to the HOA attorney. They said you don't have the right because I'm on the board." I took a slow breath. "Karen, the HOA doesn't override state tenancy law. You're a tenant, not an owner. The court date's set. There's nothing left to argue." Her voice cracked. "You don't understand. If I lose this house, I lose everything." For a split second, there was something almost human in her voice. Panic. Fear, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. She straightened up, pointing at me again. "I'll take you down before you take me out. I'll find something, some dirt on you." "Go back inside before you do something you'll regret," I said quietly. She hesitated, then spat on the ground in my direction and stormed back to her car. The tires spun on my grass as she sped back across the street. I called the sheriff's office right after. They arrived within minutes, saw the tire tracks on my lawn, and made an official incident report. By morning, half the neighborhood had heard about what happened. A few of the neighbors stopped by, telling me in hushed tones how Karen had knocked on their doors late at night, ranting about conspiracies and trying to rally them against me. Later that day, I received an email from my lawyer. "Court hearing moved up. Judge wants this case expedited due to evidence of harassment." I couldn't help but smile at the timing. Across the street, Karen stood in her driveway, arms crossed, glaring at me like she was trying to burn holes through me. She knew her days in that house were numbered.
The morning of the hearing, Karen strutted into the courthouse like she was about to win an award. She wore a navy blazer, hair pulled back tight, and carried a thick folder stuffed with papers. I was already there with my lawyer, sitting quietly near the front. When she spotted me, she smirked. "Enjoy your little show while it lasts," she muttered as she passed. Inside the courtroom, the judge barely looked up from the files before saying, "Let's keep this brief. I've reviewed the evidence submitted by both parties." Karen jumped up first, speaking so fast the judge had to raise a hand to slow her down. "Your Honor, this man bought property through loopholes, harassed me, cut my utilities, and now wants to throw me out of my own home." I didn't react. My lawyer calmly stood and handed the judge a thick packet of documents. The lease, the property deed, the video of her towing my truck, the footage of her cutting my power, and the HOA notices she'd forged. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly as he flipped through the evidence. Then he looked at Karen. "Do you have proof of these claims you've made?" Karen fumbled through her folder, pulling out the same fake HOA eviction letter she'd tried to serve me weeks ago. The judge glanced at it for 2 seconds, then set it aside. "This isn't a legal document. Do you have anything else?" She hesitated, then shook her head. I was protecting the community. He's dangerous." The judge cut her off sharply. "The court isn't here to hear personal grudges. We're here about unlawful harassment and eviction proceedings." Karen's face turned red. "You don't understand. He's trying to ruin me." My lawyer spoke up calmly. "Your Honor, my client isn't trying to ruin anyone. He's enforcing his legal rights as the property owner. Miss Karen has repeatedly trespassed, tampered with utilities, and issued fraudulent eviction notices. We've provided all the evidence." The judge leaned back in his chair, sighing. "This isn't even a difficult decision. The evidence overwhelmingly supports the landlord. Miss Karen, you are hereby ordered to vacate the property within 7 days. Failure to comply will result in forcible removal by the sheriff's office. Additionally, you will reimburse the towing fee and damages caused by tampering with utilities." For a heartbeat, the entire courtroom went still. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes flicked to me, full of rage and disbelief. Then she slammed her folder shut so hard the echo startled the clerk. "You'll regret this," she hissed at me as she stormed out. My lawyer gave me a small nod. That went about as smoothly as it could have. Outside the courthouse, a couple of neighbors who'd come to watch approached me, shaking their heads. One of them said quietly, "About time somebody stood up to her." That evening, I sat on my porch, watching the sunset paint the street orange and gold. Across the street, Karen's curtains twitched. I could see her pacing back and forth, talking on the phone, still scheming. I knew she'd fight it till the very last day, but for the first time in weeks, I finally felt like justice had caught up to her.